What's up, Tailgaters? My name is Tailgate Nate. Welcome back to my channel. I'm back with another schedule preview and record prediction. Today, we're going to go ahead and look at the 2020 Florida Gators. Florida was a team last year that, for me, I was iffy on last year. I didn't think that Florida was going to live up to all the hype. Um, but Florida last year proved me wrong. Almost every other week, Florida came out and played better than I had thought they were capable of. So I'm not going to listen to myself twice on that. And this year, I have some high expectations for the Gators. I think they can compete in the SEC. Um, I think that they can get back on top of the SEC. Of course, they're going to have to get through the SEC competition, which is already pretty tough. So speaking of which, let's go ahead. Let's look at the Florida schedule. All right, so here's the schedule for the Gators. When you look here, there are some games that, of course, stand out to you. But to me, it's a lot easier than last year. Last year, they also had to play Auburn. That game is out. A couple of games that they played on the road last year, they get at home. So Florida's schedule is pretty favorable. But before we do a deep dive into that schedule, you'll look down there. Their 2019 record was 11-2. Missed out in the SEC championship game. Still got to go to New Year's Six Bowl and ended up beating Virginia in the Orange Bowl. That's how they got to 11 wins. And up there at the top, the home games are going to be in orange. The away games are going to be in blue. And as always, the neutral site game that Florida's got, it's going to be in black. So let's go ahead and let's just dive right into their schedule. And their first game of the year is against Eastern Washington. I'm not going to talk about this one that long. Florida should handle Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington, a fairly good FCS team at the FCS level. But then when you match up with Florida in the swamp, it's no competition. I'll take the Gators big here in this one. Then they get to stay at home and they get to play Kentucky. So Kentucky is a team this year that I think has the potential to be really, really good. They were pretty decent last year. I think Kentucky went 7-5 in the regular season and ended up making a bowl game. They beat Virginia Tech in the Belk Bowl, I believe. And Kentucky is not losing a whole lot. Like, they're losing some, but Kentucky's bringing back a lot of great talent. I would watch out for Kentucky this year. I think Kentucky could surprise a lot of people. But when you have to play Florida in the swamp, I mean, the swamp is one of the toughest places to play in all of college football. I know it's a rivalry game. A couple years ago, Kentucky beat Florida for the first time in, I believe, almost 30 years, which is absolutely insane. I don't think Kentucky is going to beat them this year, especially because in the swamp. Give me Florida. Then you get to stay at home for the third week in a row, and you get to play South Alabama. Also not going to talk about this one long. South Alabama, out of the Sun Belt Conference, just not all that great of a team. South Alabama has been down for the longest time. I don't know. I can't really tell you a time when South Alabama was pretty decent. I know they've had their quarters and stuff like that where they've looked pretty okay. But I don't see this one being close. Florida's just got too much talent. I don't have to say any more about this one. Florida will win. Then they get their first road game of the season. It's on the road at Tennessee. Now, I've talked about Tennessee a lot in my other schedule preview videos, and I keep saying that Tennessee's an interesting team because they are. We don't know how good they're going to be next year. Everyone's hyping them up like Tennessee's going to be back. A couple years ago, I believe it was either 2016, 2017, or maybe before that. I can't quite remember the year, but a couple years ago, Tennessee was a fairly good team. Tennessee was ranked, I believe, for most of the season. Kind of flatlined a little bit toward the end, but now they're expecting that type of Tennessee team to be back with a little bit more. The problem for Tennessee with me is they're returning their quarterback, Jarrett Guarantano, but Tennessee doesn't really have anyone else that stands out to me. They have some really good athletes on both sides of the ball. Their defense is going to be pretty good. Definitely an above average defense at Tennessee. But they just don't have the playmakers that Florida has. I mean, when you look at Florida, they can beat Tennessee in pretty much every single position. And I know this game is on the road, but I'm taking Florida here. Then you get to come back home for a couple more games. The first is going to be against South Carolina. I talked about this in, I believe, the Georgia video, but South Carolina, a team that probably could have gone 8-4 last year. Their schedule was just super hard. They were playing all the good teams in the SEC. I think South Carolina has potential to be pretty good this year. Again, it doesn't help when you have to play games like this. You got to play in the swamp. Florida is too good. I think where this game is going to come down to, I think South Carolina can make it interesting for maybe a half. But when you look at on Florida, it's the same thing with Tennessee. Every position, they are so much better than South Carolina. I'll take the Gators in this one. Then they get to play LSU. This is an interesting game for me. Right now, this game is like a 51-49 game in favor of Florida, just because of what Florida is returning. I'll talk about this in the LSU video. But LSU is losing so much, as we all know. Defending national champions, but they're losing a lot. They are losing basically 90% of their offense, in my opinion. They're losing so much of their offense. They still have Derek Stingley Jr. coming back on defense. But again, this one's in the swamp at home. Florida, LSU beat them last year. Got to play on the road against Florida this year. I think this one's going to be close. I'm favoring towards Florida just because I know a little bit more of what Florida is going to do. I know Florida's got more weapons coming back than LSU does. I know LSU has Jamar Chase. But Florida's also got some pretty good wide receivers. Kyle Trask coming back. Florida's running game is always pretty good. And what stands out to me is Florida's special teams probably going to be one of the best in the SEC next year. I'm going to go ahead and lean towards the Gators. I think this one's going to be really close, though. Then you go on the road to play Ole Miss. Ole Miss is going to be an interesting team next year. You're going to have Lane Kiffin coaching. But Ole Miss should be a fairly interesting team to watch next year. I don't think they're going to be able to get near the top of the SEC. But this is an away game, possible trap game for Florida, maybe. I'm not ready to consider that quite yet. Again, I'm leaning towards the Gators in this one. As I've said so many times, just too much talent for Florida. And I'm not going to listen to myself twice that Florida is going to be down. I think Florida really does have a shot to be something special. And already here in week 7. Yeah, I mean, I got Florida winning this one big. Then they have a bye week, and you do not want your bye week anywhere else. If you're a Florida fan out there, this is exactly where you want your bye week. This is right where you want it because it's before the big game against Georgia, world's largest cocktail party. This game, as I talked about in the Georgia game, is very close for me. It's very, very close. Both teams' offenses are pretty good. Georgia's going to have their offense with Jamie Newman figured out by now. They're going to get all their wide receivers, running backs worked in. Georgia is going to be ready to play in this game. Florida, it's in Jacksonville. It's basically in Florida's backyard. And then when you compare these two teams, Georgia to me is the slightly better team. Not that Florida's not great because Florida is outstanding. I think Florida's going to be really good next year. I just think Georgia's defense is better equipped to handle Florida's offense than if it were vice versa. So I think Georgia's defense can handle Florida's offense better than Florida's defense can handle Georgia's offense. So again, I'm leaning towards Georgia in this one. I think this game could go either way. I'm leaning towards Georgia in this one, so I got to give Florida the loss earlier right here. But again, not going to be surprised if Florida pulls out a win here because these are two very evenly matched teams. And I think this game could possibly decide the SEC West or SEC East, the SEC East. Then, I go on the road to play Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's bringing in the worst recruiting class in the SEC. I don't see this one being close. I'm not going to talk about it for any longer because I'm taking Florida. Then they get to come back home You're going to play the Missouri Tigers. Missouri would have made a bowl game last year if it weren't for the postseason ban. So they did not make a bowl game, but Missouri was an interesting team last year, kind of had a roller coaster type season. Of course, some big upsets early in the year for Missouri, and then they got some pretty good wins later in the season, got up to bowl eligibility, but of course did not make a bowl game because of the postseason ban. Saying all that, again, I've said it so many times about this video, Florida's too talented. Missouri's bringing in the second worst recruiting class in all of the SEC. Of course, Drew Lock wasn't there last year, which means he's not going to be there this year. And Missouri, with a lot of the other guys that they're losing, I'm happily going to pick Florida in this game. It should be no problem for the Gators. Then the next week, they stay at home and they get to play New Mexico State. I'm not going to talk about this one long. You all know what I'm going to say. Florida's going to win this one big. New Mexico State, I believe, went either 1-11 or 2-10 last year. But I believe they have double-digit losses. New Mexico State just can't. And it's not even an I think or I don't think. It's New Mexico State just can't match up with Florida. This one's not going to be close. Florida big. Then possibly what I think is going to be one of the more underrated games this college football season. It's Florida and Florida State. This game was good a couple years ago, and then the respective teams had their downs and ups, and it was blowouts. And I think this year it has potential to be a really close game. Mike Norvell is going to come in to coach for Florida State. Florida State's got some pretty good athletes. Of course, James Blackman coming back at quarterback. This should be a really fun game to watch. Florida's going to be playing this game on the road. I think that makes a huge deal. Again, I'm going to lean toward Florida in this one. I just think they have more talent than Florida State does. But I think this is going to be a really good game to watch. I really do think Florida State could give Florida a good game. Florida, though, again, the only real thing they're losing is C.J. Henderson. Couple other guys are gone because of seniority. C.J. Henderson's going to be the big loss. But other than that, I think Florida's going to be fine next year. So I have them winning this one against Florida State. So now with everything said, considered, thought about, my record prediction for the Florida Gators is 11-1. And that one loss to me is going to be the Georgia. Now, I totally see them beating Georgia, in which case the one loss would either be Tennessee, LSU, or Florida State. But again, as I've said in the Alabama and Georgia video, the SEC is too competitive this year for any team to go undefeated, in my opinion. I think it very well is plausible. Definitely could happen. But again, just the SEC is super competitive. Florida, you look at their schedule, of course, LSU, Georgia, the two big games on their schedule. But I have them 11-1, and to me, the one loss is to Georgia. So now let's move on to my record range. And what this is I take what I think this team's best case scenario is, and this team's worst case scenario is. Worst case scenario for Florida, in my opinion, is 9-3. And to me, there's three losses. Two of them easily are the Georgia and LSU. And then when you look, maybe Tennessee gets you, maybe Ole Miss is a trap game. You could lose the rivalry game to Florida State or Kentucky. But yeah, I just think worst case scenario for Florida is 11-3. I think they're too good to do any worse. But 9-3 is worst case for me. Again, if C.J. Henderson is just a bigger loss than we all think, and we all know it's a pretty big loss for Florida, but if it's an even bigger loss, if Florida's defense is just not all that great next year, I think worst case for Florida is 9-3. Again, the three losses to Georgia, LSU, and then one of the road games. Most likely Tennessee or Florida State. Then, of course, the best case scenario, 12-0. Totally plausible. You get LSU at home. LSU is not going to be as good as they were last year. Georgia, you basically get them in your backyard. So it'll be a really interesting season to watch for Florida. But again, I definitely do think that game there against Georgia could decide the SEC East. So yeah, the best case scenario for Florida for me is 12-0. I could totally see them winning every game on the schedule. The LSU game is manageable. The Georgia game, it's going to be a little more difficult, but definitely manageable when you got mostly the home crowd behind you. And then when you look at everyone else on this list, their road games are not difficult. You got to go on the road to Tennessee. Could be interesting. We don't know how good Tennessee is going to be. We don't know how good Florida State's going to be. We don't know how good Ole Miss is going to be. And I think we all can assume that Vanderbilt's not going to be all that great. So they don't have really any tough road game. So Florida could totally go 12-0. But again, my prediction for the Gators is 11-1. So that's going to do it for my schedule preview and record prediction for the Florida Gators. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like. Also consider subscribing if you're new to the channel or just enjoy the content that I put out. Also, if you haven't done so already, please leave a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. I truly do read every single one. Please tell me, what do you have Florida going this year? A couple things I missed, maybe. Yeah, just please do leave a comment down below because I really appreciate feedback. Again, I'm still trying to get used to this whole YouTube thing, so I really do appreciate it. And until next time, play hard, but tailgate harder. I'll see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.